Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Month of September wrapping up this USC program going into the month of October. It's time to update the USC stock report, talking about some risers in the month of September, talking about some fallers, some guys that we have some question marks about heading into the rest of 2024. Now, I use the term fallers. I'm going to try to think of a different term for these kind of players that we want to see more from going into the month of October. Fired up to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, to the USC fans, I think most importantly, one, y'all continue to give a ton of input, a ton of feedback in the comment section. Probably 20 to 25 players we could have talked about in this USC stock report. I chose 6 to talk about, so I would love to hear some shout outs in terms of players you think have impressed early on in September, some players that you want to see more from as well. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I say it every time, but the amount of support the USC fans continue to show to the boys, it's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into the fallers first. And the reason I'm choosing to go with fallers is we've highlighted, at least in my opinion, a lot of the positives that have been going on with this USC team in the month of September, but that doesn't mean this USC team has been perfect. There are some things that we want to get cleaned up. And I want to start on the offensive line. This is by far the biggest question mark I have for USC going into the rest of 2024. I think this team checks a lot of boxes. You are starting to see them figure out what wide receivers they want to feature. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. You're starting to see this defense play at a different caliber. The one question mark I think we all have for this USC team is, can this offensive line hold up as you go and play some defenses with some real good front sevens? Like, you saw it be a problem on the road against Michigan. There's going to be a lot of other defensive lines that are on this USC schedule over the next couple of weeks. This is an offensive line that I think flat out needs to get better. And I know we've been critical of Lincoln Riley's play calling to start the 2024 season. I think a fair amount of it has to do with the offensive line. You can tell Lincoln Riley is trying to call plays, knowing dang well that this offensive line is going through some growing pains. Now, the first offensive lineman I want to talk about, guard Alani Noah, you're seeing them kind of rotate Amos in there as well. I think that makes sense. Look, Alani Noah has been quite bad in pass protection, not as good as we thought in the run game as well. The balance seems to be off. Like, he is kind of falling on his face way too much. You can tell that the game around him is going pretty fast. And when he's matched up with more athletic interior defensive linemen, that athleticism has been a problem for Lonnie Noah. I don't think we got to expand on that much more. I think everybody who's watched a lot of USC football knows you got to figure out that guard spot. And whether it's Alani Noah taking a step in the right direction, whether it's going with Amos, I think that position needs to be figured out. Second one on the offensive lines, Elijah Page. And quite frankly, you could probably throw Mason Murphy into this conversation as well. Jonah's been solid. Emmanuel Pregnon's probably been the best offensive lineman on this team, but there are some question marks kind of all over the offensive line. And I think that's what makes it so difficult for Lincoln Riley. If there was just one problem you had on the offensive line, you can kind of work around it. You can chip with the running back. You can put a tight end and chip as well. But there's kind of a couple problems, and that makes it really hard for Lincoln Riley to try to scheme up an offense that has a couple of, I wouldn't use the term liability, but a couple holes in the offensive lineman. Now, Elijah Page obviously struggled in a big way against Michigan. Now, to give Michigan credit, those are some really good edge rushers. Those are 2 edge rushers that will be selected in the NFL draft in the next 12 months. That being said, there were some reps in that football game that were just non-competitive reps, right? Miller Moss just taking a beating back there. We all know Elijah Page has every single trait that you want in a starting left tackle. I think it's fair to say he was struggling with a little bit of the crowd noise in that football game. It was very clear to me that he was getting off the ball quite late at that left tackle spot. So again, I think we should all remind ourselves this is a redshirt freshman that's getting thrusted into a conference with really good line of scrimmage play. But you got to ask, and you quite frankly need more from Elijah Page if this USC team wants to be a college football playoff caliber team. Because a lot of times when you're starting to compete at the highest level of the collegiate landscape, you need offensive linemen that can play at a high level because you're seeing some elite defensive linemen on the other side. So Elijah Page, Alani Noah, probably could throw in Mason Murphy into that conversation as well. Those three players on the offensive line, you want to see some significant steps in the month of October. The last faller I want to talk about, and this one is kind of a complicated one for me, and that's Zachariah Branch. I do feel like USC, and we're just going to lump in the wide receivers in general. Like Jacoby Lane is obviously a riser, and so we'll talk about him in this kind of segment here. Zachariah Branch is a guy that needs to be on the football field. He needs to have the football in his hands. I think USC is still trying to figure out how they want to use Zachariah Branch. I think it's pretty clear that as a pure wide receiver, the development hasn't quite been there. And that's something we talked about all offseason long, where last year he was kind of treated as a gadget player, made some really not flashy, but really explosive plays for USC with the football in his hands. But you could tell he wasn't necessarily the most polished wide receiver yet in terms of running routes, catching the football in traffic. I still would say he's not quite there yet. And I think you saw Lincoln Riley specifically in that game against Wisconsin get to using Zachariah Branch in a little bit more productive ways. Simple crossing routes. I'd like to see some more end arounds. I'd like to see some more screens for Zachariah Branch. Don't ask him to do things that he's not quite ready to do yet, because you have some other wide receivers that you can run this offense through. Zachariah Branch doesn't need to be the focal point within this USC offense when you have a guy like Jacoby Lane, but you want to get him touches in a lot of creative ways. So I say Zachariah Branch as a faller. The special teams hasn't had the impact on this USC team from a special team standpoint that he had as a true freshman either. You want to see a little bit more development as a pure pass catcher, pure wide receiver from Zachariah Branch. Now, I think the good news for USC fans is you're seeing some stepping up from a lot of other wide receivers, most notably Jacoby Lane, who, ton of credit to the USC fans, were banging the table for this kid all offseason. Jacoby Lane is one of the best wide receivers in the country, certainly in the Big Ten. And you're starting to see USC, Miller Moss, Lincoln Riley start to understand that. And I think it took a couple of weeks to understand that Jacoby Lane's a guy. I don't know why it took him so long, but it took him a little bit. They're starting to feature him specifically in the red area. That's a massive storyline because Jacoby Lane's much more than just a contested catch wide receiver. Now, he's elite at that 4 to 6 in contested catch situations, an exceptional number. There's not many defensive backs that can compete with Jacoby Lane at the catch point, but the route running, the body control on the boundary. I mean, this is a truly, I think, special wide receiver we're seeing kind of blossom. And as he's blossoming, you're starting to USC decide, hey, we got to run our offense through him. And that's going to allow Zachariah Branch to play more of the role that I think he best fits right now. And I'm not saying Zachariah Branch is pigeonholed to being just a gadget offensive playmaker. I think there's a bright future for Zachariah Branch as a wide receiver. But again, he's a true sophomore, not even halfway through his sophomore year. I think there's still some development that needs to take place. And as that development is taking place, you got some other wide receivers that are making some plays for this USC offense. Now, going to the risers, I got to see more Quentin Joyner. That don't get it twisted in terms of me saying Woody Marks ain't good. Like, Woody Marks is a very good running back, has been playing very good for USC. Quentin Joyner's numbers, 23 carries, averaging 7.3 yards per carry. Now, on 23 carries, we're going to center this up real quick. On 23 carries for Quentin Joyner, he's forced 9 missed tackles. An exceptional rate for Quentin Joyner. He's been phenomenal with contact, 4.4 yards per contact, or after contact per carry. We all see for Will Johnson, this kid is a bruising running back, right? 5'11", 216. Now, what I think separates Quentin Joyner that not enough people talk about is how explosive he can be at the second level. This is a guy that ran a 10.99 in the 100-meter dash coming out of high school. Yes, he's a physical running back that likes to run behind his pads, but he also can give you that explosive dimension that I don't think people really realize about Quentin Joyner. You look at the 10-plus yard key, he's got 6 of them. And 6 of his 23 carries have gone for 10-plus yards. I get he's a young cat, and you got a really good veteran running back that's seen a lot of football in Woody Marks. I want to see a little bit more Quentin Joyner because I think he is running the rock exceptionally well for USC. Next riser, and let's just talk about him, Miller Moss. He's been so good. And there's been some odds stacked against him. Not only has he seen an elite defense against Michigan, has he made some mistakes? Yeah, absolutely. But Miller Moss has also been a gamer for USC. And the USC fans who've been rocking with the boys going back to the offseason know that I was higher on than most about Miller Moss. We gotta switch to the risers here. We're on the risers now. The USC fans know I was high on Miller Moss. I don't even know if I was quite this high on Miller Moss. You look at some of the numbers, specifically the big time throws. We kind of labeled Miller Moss as a quarterback that's all right. He's going to run this Lincoln Riley offense. He's going to be really accurate. The ball's going to get out of his hands quickly. He's done all of that behind an offensive line that has really struggled, but he's also made some exceptional throws, specifically pushing the ball down the field 20 plus yards. He's 10 of 18, a 55% completion percentage, 20 plus yards down the field. Now, one thing I would like to see more of, and I think we are going to see more of, is let him push the ball down the field a little bit more. I mean, he's only thrown 11% of his attempts 20 plus yards down the field. That's a middle of the road number. Like, it's not a ton. It's not a very few. 55% completion percentage on 20 plus yard attempts. I want to see more of them, especially as you get the emergence of Jacoby Lane and Deuce Robinson. Like, let's go test these defenses attacking the deeper third as Miller Moss is continuing to show that he can push it down the field. Now, a conversation to have is you need your offensive line to hold up in pass protection. If you're going to push the ball down the field, that's probably a prerequisite to this conversation. But if this offensive line can hold up, you can go to maybe some play action, move in the pocket. Miller Moss attacking the deeper third has been exceptional. Going to the defensive side of the football, a lot of names you can throw out there. Obviously, Eric Gentry, we've highlighted him a bunch. I think all three of the linebackers, quite frankly, played really, really good football. Mason Cobb looks like we remember him at Oklahoma State. Wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more Zion Branch. Like, again, Kamari Ramsey's been really good. Achille Arnold has been solid. I don't know if I'd say he's been really good. Zion Branch, he's a special athlete. There's a reason he was a top 60 national recruit coming out of high school, 6'2", 210, got his little brother's genes, big body, good mover, can do a lot of different things, is very good in run support. We saw that against Wisconsin. I get with Achille Arnold coming back. He wears the green dot, one of the leaders of this defense. Zion Branch probably goes back to that rotational depth role. I would like to see him play a little. I think he's much better than Bryson Shaw, quite frankly. And I think he flashes. And I think he's finally healthy, and he's certainly playing like that. USC's got a lot of risers. Again, it's a frustrating loss to Michigan 2 weeks ago. Don't let that cover up for how improved this USC team is at a lot of different facets. I think they have a significantly better pass catcher room than they had last year. The tight ends, even with Lake McCree going down, have made some plays. Outside of the offensive line, to me, this USC team is checking a lot of boxes. And if you can clean up the offensive line, this team is a top team in the Big Ten, and it can contend for a college football playoff spot and, quite frankly, Big Ten title if that offensive line cleans it up. We'll close it out there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.